Welcome to Remarkable Retail Podcast, Season 6, Episode 9, presented by Market Dial. I'm Michael LeBlanc.
And I'm Steve Dennis.
A very busy wrap to the earnings seasons to report on this week. And speaking of busy, we're busy lining up guests for both Shop Talk in Vegas coming up soon and the World Retail Congress in Barcelona. So tons of super interesting content on the way for the people. Now, speaking of the World Retail Congress, shout out to the listeners. Don't sleep on the very excellent bonus episode with Suzanne Long, Chief Sustainability and Transformation Officer at Albertsons, a $70 billion grocery powerhouse and house of about, 30 regional brands. Such an impressive executive.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to her talk in Barcelona. I felt like we just kind of touched the tip of the iceberg with our interview. Lots of great content in it, but much, much more we could have gone into. So hopefully people will make it to Barcelona and hear all she has to share. But in the meantime, good bite-sized, snack-sized kind of episode as a bonus this week.
Speaking of impressive retail executives, our special guest on this episode is Kevin Tulip, Ireland-based Primark's US President, coming to us live from Boston.
My first experience with Primark was actually in London when my older daughter, Elena, was a student over there during her junior year of college. And I wandered into the Primark store, and it was easy to find it in the mall because it had about 80% of the traffic in the entire Westfield Mall. It was quite extraordinary. And you'll hear me in the interview make a mistake because I think of Primark as being a UK retailer because they have such a big presence there. But as you learn, they actually are, and as you mentioned, they are Ireland-based, but really a remarkable retailer, now expanding well beyond the Ireland and UK area to Europe, the US, and who knows, maybe even Canada, Michael, one of these days.
Who knows? Well, there is a large Irish community here to start with who would welcome them. And of course, we just lost, actually, coincidentally, an anchor tenant for a bunch of malls. So there's space, which is sometimes hard to come by. So the timing has never been better. All right, maybe we'll start that. We'll start that rumor. All right, well, let's get into the news. That's right. It's the wobbly unicorn sound, which signals some earnings results from some wobbly unicorns. Some high-flying unicorns are formerly. Am I mixing metaphor there? High-flying unicorns. Let's talk about Allbirds.
Well, on the heels of last week's episode, where we were talking about whether there might be a retail disruptor or apocalypse, unfortunately, we got more evidence that might be true. So first up was Allbirds. Allbirds has kind of a weird place in my heart because I got into a Twitter fight with a bunch of people, which of course is always a good thing to do. Right. Nothing like a good social media fight.
Good spend of your time.
Yeah, exactly. So one of these days I'll learn something. But when Allbirds went public in November of 21, they had, I want to say, about a $4.5 billion valuation. And I just thought that was completely insane. And turns out every once in a while I am right because this thing has gone into it's been a bit of a dumpster fire. Well, we're really mixing metaphors here today. But anyway, they came out with their quarterly and full year reports. And for the fiscal year, sales were actually up 7%, though that's pretty anemic for an allegedly fast-growing company, but down 13% in the fourth quarter. And in particular, that seemed to do with a big miss they had with a line of more high-performance running gear as opposed to kind of their core product offering, which led to a big hit in gross margin. But the overall thing that was quite scary and has sent their stock down even further, it's down close to 90% since their IPO, was they had a net loss of over $100 million compared to $45 million last year. So things are not going in the right direction. Mm-hmm. They've announced that they are going to be doing a big rethink, that this year will be a year of kind of transition, and that at least the elements that have been were shared publicly gets back to slowing store openings. And this actually gets back to last week's episode as well, when we were talking about, it's not so clear that that some of these brands that are pushing on physical stores are actually going to see that be significantly accretive to earnings. And Allbirds, which is at about 42 stores, I think, seems to be saying that is true. They're also maybe looking for a partner for international. And then the other thing I thought was particularly interesting is they hired a chief transformation officer. And I know that's become sort of a buzzy title, but how is it that a new disruptive brand that is allegedly transforming retail needs to hire a chief transformation officer. I would think that's kind of...
It's like a Mobius loop of transformation.
Yeah, very strange. But anyway, things aren't so good there. They signal things were going to be tough going forward. They've got a decent balance sheet, so I don't think there's any, sort of any imminent financial risk here. Now, moving on to a couple of others quickly, Stitch Fix, which is a brand we've talked about multiple times, they also shared their earnings, and this they continue to really struggle. They had a decrease of sales of 20% year over year, a decrease in active clients of 11%, and their net loss, which they've been running a net loss for a while now, widened considerably. Another company that has lost nearly 95% of their peak valuation. So this is a brand that continues to struggle.
A quick comment on that. I know you're going to say the CFO's kind of left the room, but is that a factor of the change of structure workplace-wise, like less women? I mean, primarily their customers are women who are looking to say, listen, I go into the office 5 days a week. I need a lot of different outfits, and this is a great service because it gets outfits to my door, and I can wear something different to work pretty often. Now, is this a symptom of that, or what do you think about that?
I think it's a contributing factor, but probably not the primary one. I mean, it certainly doesn't help them. But I think Stitch Fix is emblematic of everything we talked about in last week's episode, so I'll let people go back and listen to that if they hadn't. But it's really that the underlying customer dynamics of the portfolio and the size of the opportunity here is smaller than the way they've built this model. So whether they can get it back on track, I guess we'll see. But not good trajectory there. And then lastly, on the Wobbly Unicorn section of the program, ThreadUp, which is a resale platform, their revenue fell, not a lot, but about 2%. And similarly, they had some weakness in their active buyers and the number of orders. Their net loss widened as well. They also, similar pattern here with some of these guys, and probably a big reason I go to this disruptor apocalypse kind of narrative, their stock's also down about 90%. What's particularly interesting about ThreadUp is that they are in the hot resale category. People have been talking about for 2 or 3 years, all this, what do you call it, circular economy and all this kind of stuff. So to the extent that's true, you would assume they're riding this wave, and not so much in their results. And it's actually a pretty small business. Only I think they're maybe do just under $300 million a year. So anyway,
I think it's a hard but not impossible business to make money at in the resale. But let's talk about somebody a name I haven't heard in a long time, Blue Apron, which I thought actually was gone already. But they don't operate here. But I thought they're already out of business. But they're still around, I guess. Yeah.
They are, well, and maybe not for much longer. And we are, just a warning or a heads up to our listeners, we are going to move to better news in about 45 seconds. But the other thing, just kind of following on with this theme of the disruptor apocalypse, hashtag disruptor apocalypse, is that S&P Global Market Intelligence put out a list of these newer DTC brands that have significant or growing bankruptcy risk. And there were 11 of them. Not going to mention all of them, but ThreadUp was on that list. Wayfair, which we talked about last week, is on that list. Farfetch and Blue Apron also on that list. And the one that was highlighted on the short list of most risky was The RealReal, which I know we've talked about a few times. They've got a new CEO. So again, not a lot of positive news coming out of this sector.
That's the graveyard sound there for you. Not to be too dark about it, but all right, let's leave that alone now. Let's move on. Dick's Sporting Goods, fantastic numbers. Talk about them.
Yeah, we've got actually 2 retailers that I highlight in my book that continue to really do well. So Dick's Sporting Goods, record-setting year, continue to really grow sales. It gets a little bit weird because of some of the comparisons, but if you look back to where their sales are versus 2019, so pre-COVID, they're up 41%. Now, some of that is new stores, but a lot of that is comp. They had a full-year profit margin of 11%, which is twice as good as it was back in the pre-COVID days. They gave a little bit of a, I wouldn't say dire outlook, but muted outlook. Now, sporting goods is a category that really benefited from kind of the COVID bump. So it's not too surprising that they don't see things quite as robust going forward. But I think the other big piece of news is they are working on diversifying their store portfolio. Mm-hmm. So they were piloting a Field and Stream store concept. They opened 17 of these hunting-focused stores. They decided that that's not working well enough for them, so they're going to close those. But they are doubling down on their House of Sports brand, which is kind of like a showcase store, more focused. And so, again, kind of part of this portfolio hybrid portfolio strategy that we've talked about. So a lot of growth there and really good financial results, which is in pretty stark contrast to, as we're wrapping up this season, what we've seen from most retailers, which is even if they got positive sales growth, the profits largely pulled back.
And our good friend, Mr. Kimball, Dave Kimball, one of our guests on the show, his company, Ulta, is doing well as well.
Yeah, I mean, this is even a bigger success story, I think, in a lot of respects than Dick's. I mean, amazing comp store sales, 15.6%. I don't think we've seen anything like that, anything close to that from any major retailer. They're up, here's another, big number, up 38% compared to 2019, which is, again, is comp growth, but a bunch of new stores. 16% operating margin. Don't hear that too often in retail. And they opened 47 new stores. Turns out physical retail is still not dead. We say that every episode. And here's something every episode. I know, like I get like $10 if I say that. I have a sponsor for that. But the other thing, and I was going to point this out when we were talking about Macy's earnings, whenever that was a couple weeks ago. So Ulta, which for people outside the U.S., they are a beauty-focused concept. Their market cap is now $26 billion, which is up 134% in 5 years. Macy's, which as far as I know is the number one department store chain in the U.S. for beauty, Macy's entire sales, not just beauty, market cap is $5.5 billion, which is down 30%. So if you think about how dominant department stores were, not just in the U.S., but pretty much everywhere in the beauty category going back 10 or 15 years, here's a company that focused on that category that has just exploded with the number of doors they have, their market share and everything, while Macy's business is, well, I think it's gone down considerably, but certainly has gone nowhere. So to have a category-focused company that is 5 times as valuable as the number one department store that you compete with, I think it's pretty remarkable. I think that's a good use of that word.
Let's wrap up with a couple of quick things. JCP earnings, JCPenney earnings swings to a loss. Talk about that for a second. And we should also probably talk about Gap, who put out some news and some executive changes and some less than positive results. A few quick comments on that?
Yeah, just quickly, JCPenney, because they're now owned by Brookfield, does not report their results separately, but there was a filing that they had to do. I think had to do with some debt registration or something like that, where they revealed some numbers, not for the holiday quarter, but we did see some quarterly numbers for the last several quarters. And if you look at the third quarter, what we saw is they were making some money, but they swung to a loss. So, the general sense, even though there's some positive statements that have been made about pennies, is if you look at what we know about their traffic, what we see just more broadly in the moderate department store space, and now we've got this little tidbit about some of their earnings, is things are not turning around, at least not yet there. Gap's news, just sort of more trouble in the great middle of apparel. They had quite weak holiday season. So yeah, they're making some changes in leadership. So I mean, you just continue to see.
Right? I think Athletica, which was seen as one of their brands on the make, they're changing their president there, right?
Yeah, it's kind of I don't remember enough about all the changes, but it seems like it's been kind of a revolving door in management in not only the Gap brand, but Athleta and Old Navy. And so, yeah, it's they just keep trying stuff and none of it seems to really, really be taking hold.
Quick hit on Amazon announcing they're closing some of their Go stores. I mean, some of that I looked at the locations. I'm familiar with their locations in New York, and it feels like there's just nobody there anymore. Like, 50% of people are not going down to Manhattan, certainly not 5 days a week or 6. So I think just nobody's in there. So to me, I don't know. Do you think it's it's certainly not moving them towards their 3,000 store location, but at the same time, it feels, it does feel like, listen, nobody's there. Downtown isn't the way it was, so we don't need this store anymore. And do you have a broader assessment that maybe the technology is just not as compelling as everyone thought it might be?
Well, I think the one thing we can say definitively is that the Amazon Go formula is not working where Amazon needs for it to be, because this concept is quite old now at this point. If it's a concept that is working well, they'd be rolling it out, right? So I think this just fits into what we've seen with Amazon Style and Amazon Fresh, that Amazon is going through a big rethink and maybe a reboot. So we'll see. But yes, I agree with you. I think that they are trying to clean up things that are a drag on their performance and that don't really take them forward. Whether this is a sign that they're bailing on the rollout of Amazon Go, I wouldn't conclude that, because they experiment so much, and some of this stuff is kind of a rounding error. But as we have talked about, and as part of my predictions for the year, we're going to see some big changes at Amazon. This isn't a signal of a big change. I think it's really just sort of a precursor to some bigger moves in physical retail, which might be doubling down on growth or maybe pulling back completely.
Some interesting news from one of our prior guests from Bunnings, Michael Schneider. In Australia, New Zealand, Bunnings, which is kind of like a Home Depot format, and not kind of, it is a Home Depot, a home improvement format, has made a big move into pets. It's apparently one of the biggest moves from a category perspective, biggest expansion in decades. What do you think of that? I mean, it's an interesting, we all know how interesting the pet category is, but do you think it's going to work in a big box format?
Yeah, I think it could. I mean, I certainly don't know a ton about the Australian and New Zealand pet market, but I think a lot of the category killers, and this is maybe topic for another, could be a focused episode, but the category killers that were so successful really around the world in the 80s and 90s, many of them are really struggling to get their footing. We've talked about Bed Bath & Beyond here, but others. And I think it makes sense to try to rethink your product assortment to strengthen the overall offering. Now, it may be in particular a response to the slowness in the home market. Like, that's a worldwide phenomenon that home sales are slowing down. So it might be a bit more opportunistic. But I suspect we're going to continue to see a lot of changes from the home improvement players, folks like Best Buy and others. Some of the long-term trends are not necessarily in their favor.
All right. Well, let's leave it there. Now, before we get to our excellent interview with Kevin Tulip, President of Primark US, a few words from our presenting sponsor. There are two types of retailers: those that are committed to transforming at the speed of disruption, those that aren't. If you're a retailer that implements significant changes by intuition, you may soon join the Hall of Shame of executives who bet the farm on initiatives that ultimately failed, so, maybe consider brushing up your resume. But if you are a retailer hungry for a better way to gain useful insights on the impact of your store layout, design, and innovation pilots, you need to know Market Dial. Market Dial is an easy-to-use testing platform that emboldens great decisions, leading to reliable, scalable results. With Market Dial, you can be confident in the outcome of your in-store pilot initiatives before rolling them out across your fleet. Validate your remarkable ideas with Market Dial's in-store testing solution. The proof is in the testing. Learn more at marketdial.com. That's marketdial.com.
Well, Michael and I are delighted to welcome Kevin Tulip to the podcast. Kevin, how are you doing today?
Yeah, I'm great. Thanks for me having me on, Steve. How are you?
We're doing well. And where are you joining us from?
Yes, I'm up here in Boston, where we have our Primark US home office.
Excellent. Well, I am sure that we'll get into a lot of details, but usually what we like to do just before we kind of dive into the questions about the business and your particular perspectives is just have the guests tell us a little bit about who they are, maybe a bit about your personal and professional journey, and then we'll dive into the questions.
Yeah, of course. So I actually joined Primark 20 years ago, just over 20 years ago now. So I started working at Primark in Newcastle, in the northeast of England, where I grew up. And I started as a holiday temp colleague working on the cash register on the ladies' floor, and actually just fell in love with retail across those first few months of being in there, and really saw that actually there was a fantastic career to be had here with the supervisors and the managers that I had around me. And at that point, the business was going through some huge growth. So I also had the ability to move around a lot. So it was great to start back then with what was back then a small Irish business, and of course today is becoming a global business.
I'm sure many of our listeners are familiar with Primark, but particularly as you're newer to the U.S. and North America, can you give us a little sense about the brand, what it's all about, value proposition, scale, scope, those sorts of things?
Yeah, of course. So we actually started in 1969, and we were founded by Arthur Ryan, who set up our first store under the name Pennies in Dublin on Mary Street. That was the first store that we opened. And the premise was always around bringing affordable fashion to the people of Dublin, something that still we base ourselves on today. We've grown over the years, over the more than 50 years, to now 15 countries, 72,000 employees globally. But we're still very much built on those foundations. So everyday affordability for everyone in all markets where we trade.
So now you are leading Primark's expansion into the U.S. and tell us a little bit about what that looks like, how it's going, some of the lessons learned.
Yeah, absolutely. So I moved over to the US in 2021. Previous to that, I'd been leading two of the markets in Northern Europe. So I was in the Netherlands and Belgium. And it was great for me to be able to move over to the US at a time where we had made a solid decision and therefore a public announcement on our growth. So we'd announced to get to 60 stores by 2026. We were trading at that time on 13 stores. We just opened a collection of stores through COVID. And it was great to join the business at that point where we were making that announcement and that growth plan. So it's been great over just over 12 months there, really building a team here, building out the team in Boston to really get ready for that growth, to open some stores. So great to say that we opened 3 stores during the holiday season there in New York, in Jamaica Avenue, Queens, City Point, Brooklyn, and Roosevelt Field on Long Island. And really getting ready now we've got 7 more store openings coming up between April and September. So a lot of focus has been getting ourselves ready for that growth, and then also making sure that we're in a great position to continue that growth through to 2026.
Now, I know that there are a number of brands that have come from the UK and tried to be successful in the US, and it hasn't necessarily gone so well. Do you take any lessons from Sainsbury, Tesco, Marks and Spencer's experience here?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we are an Irish business, so we always have a bit of a chuckle at that one. There are a number of UK businesses that have come over, but as an Irish business, we definitely feel very clear on some of the lessons that have been learned. And I think, our growth has been slow. We first opened our first store in 2015, downtown Boston. We spent a lot of time previous to even me being here, really understanding around our model and our concept and what works, and really trialing differences between store size and product range, product offer from our global range. And we really still continue to do that through to today. It's taken us from 2015 up until today to get to 16 stores. And of course, now we feel a great sense of confidence on pushing towards that 60 store estate by 2026. But I think a lot of that has been around those lessons. We right-sized a couple of stores. We looked at our product offer and saw where the US consumer was really getting excited about some of that product, and we've leaned into that. License has been a fantastic product offering for us. So we've really made sure that, we have the right licenses and the right product range. And, customers have responded to it. I was really proud that when we opened that store in City Point, downtown Brooklyn, on a very, very cold day on December 20th, we had just over 1,000 people queued up before we opened the doors. And that really tells me that the brand travels and that people are aware of our brand even before we open the store.
It's really interesting listening to your global expansion strategy. I might call it the kind of a carpenter's measure twice and cut once approach versus the kind of barnstorming into a country, open a bunch of stores on the same day. And they both create momentum differently for the business. I wanted to peel back. You just articulated some changes or thoughts around adapting merchandise strategy and merchandising strategy and maybe format. But as you go and inevitably go back to the head office and you're sitting around the table with your fellow country leaders, how do you explain, or what differences in the strategy do you talk about that are a reaction to the different competitive set or the real estate dynamics in the US, and any challenges that you ran into that was kind of unseen? You know, when you're talking to your fellow counterparts and you and the team are putting out the strategy, how do you explain America back home and what it takes that may be a bit different to be successful?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there's a few different topics that I sort of talk about when I'm talking to that peer group. I think store size is one of the major ones. I think on the continent of Europe, we would be opening stores, 60,000 square feet in city centres on traditional high streets in Europe. That's where we've been very successful and where most of our competitor set does business. Obviously for the US, although we do have a couple of stores in downtown locations, so Boston, Chicago, and Philadelphia, we do most of our business in malls. And that's where obviously the store size and layout and even department adjacencies are quite different from what we would normally do in a multi-floor store in a city centre and a high street in Europe. When it comes to product mix, so certainly for us, we're very focused on apparel. We really want to continue to build our brand here, and we're doing that, on some great, category mixes on ladies, men's, but also on children's wear, which has been a really great category for us over the last number of years and has actually been growing. And I think in Europe, of course, people are a lot more used to our brand. They've known us, and in a lot of European countries, even like me, you grow up with Primark. It's a retailer where your mom would have taken you into as a kid, so you're well aware of it. Whereas for us, we're really introducing that brand to, in some cases, a new market. So we definitely focus a lot more on the apparel. In Europe, they've got probably a bigger mix of let's say, lifestyle and homeware. And we still have that product, but a much smaller category for us. And then I think license is the other area. So we work globally with a number of licenses like Netflix, and we have a number of big sports licenses like NFL, NBA. But for us, we do a lot more in stores in terms of bringing that product together. And certainly we'd have it much further forward as a priority than maybe some of our European stores.
I mean, you're an international business executive. When you came to Boston, was there something that surprised you in terms of a challenge that you didn't think would be there? Now, of course, you came during the COVID era, so let's set that aside because none of us expected that. So let's put that one aside. But when you're sitting in your office and gearing up the business, you're like, wow, I didn't expect that to be the challenge that it turned out to be. Is there anything that comes to mind?
Yeah, I'd say probably the frequency in which our customers come into store. I think that there is definitely a difference between US and Europe. And I think in Europe, it's, for most part, a lot more people live in the city centres. So people would be dropping into stores probably more frequently, but actually spending less while they're in. Whereas I think in the US, and largely it's where we do business, obviously in malls, people are making that journey to the mall. So they might go less frequently, but actually spend longer in the store and spend more while they're in there. And I think when you then follow that through, you really need to focus even more around that in-store experience and really thinking about how do you take any pain points of being a physical only retailer and remove them, whether it's something simple like removing an item limit on the fitting room or trying to, remove a queue from a cash desk. How can we continue to do that? And although we're very, very, I'd say, obsessed on price and value, the in-store experience for us is also a massive priority where we spend a lot of time.
Interesting. It sounds like there's more similarities than differences. I just wanted to follow one quick thread on that. What about things like returns? Do you find is it higher than you would have expected? Is it about normal? And I guess I'm getting at your experience of the customers in America versus other places that you've operated. Do you find any material difference or, minor differences?
There's actually probably more similarities than differences, if I'm honest with you, which I think has also led to the success of Primark in the US so far. I think some of the learnings for me being here was, most of the European markets, and certainly where I've been based, are fairly small. So although you have some cultural differences between the big cities, they're fairly small countries. I think for me, when I took over Primark US, of course, I'm based here in Boston, but we also have a store down in Sawgrass Mills in Florida, and we have a downtown store in Chicago, Illinois. So really, really starting to understand the geography and the climate differences. It's probably been something that I've been also just getting used to and getting to grips with. I think there's a lot of benefits in it for us, but it's something that's quite different from most of the European countries where we trade.
Now let's talk about e-commerce. So famously, controversially, maybe, I don't know, but you're not a leader in e-commerce. You've been a bit, how should I say, slow to embrace. What's your thought around e-commerce, and how is that thinking evolving as you move forward?
Yeah, look, I've always been really proud to be with a business that has made a very conscious choice, and that we've thrown ourselves behind bricks and mortar, and I've always felt very proud of that. I certainly have been challenged on it throughout the years, but I really think that our strategy is built around customers coming into our store, and everything that we do, all of the conversations, meetings, all of the forums that we have in the business are always geared up towards that in-store experience and that product. I think what we have gone through over the last decade is really understanding around the impact of social media. So really building up a very large social media following, and really being clear around which platforms we want to use for that. We do a lot of our marketing on social, and we have tens of millions of followers on social media that's been built up over a long time. I think the other bit of work that's been happening and quite recently has been around updating the website. So I think we're very clear around that digital experience in terms of a customer being able to stock check, being able to see our new product online, and having great quality photographs, and being able to check what's in their local store before they make the trip in. We've been able to launch that in the UK, and actually we're looking forward to being able to launch that updated website in the US quite soon. And some of the statistics have been great. I mean, over 80% more hits on the website since the updated version's gone out, and the customer feedback has been great, around understanding what is in stock in which size before I actually get into store. So I think our focus has been very much around how do we continue to build on the in-store experience using digital. And of course, I'm sure you're aware, but we have and are trialing a click and collect model in the UK, fairly small trial, but that's ongoing at the moment for 25 stores in the UK. And look, we're really excited to see what the results look like, but for the US, I'd always be very clear that needs to be incremental to our in-store sales, and they would need to be proved in terms of that model.
Curious from a process standpoint, how you guys, if you're willing to share, kind of think about the decision-making process, because on the one hand, there's all this talk about customer centricity, and being customer obsessed. It's a pretty common thing for retailers to talk about, and I would be surprised if your customers weren't telling you they didn't want e-commerce. But at the same time, we also know there have been not just you guys, but first of all, lots of retailers have experienced the problems with actually making money in e-commerce. So it's not as if it's just a panacea for all issues. But we've also know some retailers like TJ Maxx, that a lot of the off-price retailers that have been slow to embrace e-commerce, and I think that's largely because of the profitability. So was that, how much of this was economics? How much of this is about responding to the customer, or is it just that you guys are so committed to the brick and mortar experience?
Yeah, look, we of course do get feedback of customers asking for an online store, being able to get home delivery. So we do get those comments and those requests. But what we hear far more is about customers loving our value and wanting more of it. And I think there's certainly an understanding out there that for our model to work, online just doesn't fit into that model. And I think that's where, the trial of click and collect allows us to build on feedback from customers around sort of ease of shopping and access, I guess. And we can see the results of that without really breaking the model, I guess. And that's why we're quite excited to see that. But, our choice has always been bricks and mortar. And we've always been really clear around anything that we do needs to build on top of that in-store experience.
Last question for me, and I'll pass the mic back to Steve. Lessons learned. So for the fellow retailers listening, maybe they're outside of America, maybe they're within the US. What are the key success factors? What lessons have you learned that you'd share? Say, listen, if you're going to be successful, do these 3 things, and it will work out for you. Is there anything you'd want your fellow retailers to know or understand?
Yeah, I think really, really understand the core of your business and be obsessed by it. I think for us, we're very clear around product and around that value price. And I think we've set up our business to deliver that. I think, it's very easy, to get distracted and try and be everything to everyone, and particularly in today's world, I think, it's easy to get into that. But actually, I think to build a team and to remind yourself constantly about what has made you successful and to continue to build on top of that has really led to our success. So that would be my advice, to really understand your product and be obsessed about continuing to drive that.
One thing I was going to mention earlier was that as I was prepping for this interview, I went through an investor presentation that your parent company did, which featured a lot of really amazing interiors for some of your stores around the world, which kind of leads me, not only to talk about what's next for you and Primark here in the States, but also more broadly. Is there anything you can share about the growth plans and some of what you've got in store for other markets as well?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, look, we're now at 15 countries around the world. So obviously, look, I talk a lot about the US expansion, but there's still a huge amount of expansion happening across our European markets, as well as the 60 stores by 2026. Globally, we're moving towards 530 stores by 2026, which is exciting. We've got some great growth markets like France and Italy, where, we're really proud of the results and also the stores that we're opening there. So we continue on that as well. And for us here in the US, 60 stores by 2026 is where we made sort of our stand and our ambitions clear. And look, I'm excited to see the continued success. I'm excited to see, we had a great holiday. I'm looking forward to the new store openings in 2023. And we'll continue to learn the lessons. We'll continue to be obsessive about that and look to really refine the business model for the US market. And look, hopefully we'll continue that and be able to announce further growth in the future.
Well, I know Michael's looking forward to stores coming to Canada, so I don't know if you have any breaking news here. But
we have a store opening in Buffalo coming up, so we do know that around 40% of our customer base in our new store at Walden Galleria is going to be coming across the border, so we're excited.
Right. Listen, I think there's lots of opportunity. I think the Canadians would love to see you here, and it's exciting. A business that continues to expand. It's been a fascinating interview. So on behalf of Steve and myself, thanks so much for joining us on the Remarkable Retail Podcast. It was a great insight into a global business that is making it successful in around the world and in the United States. And it was a great peek into your thinking and strategy. So thanks again, Kevin, for joining us.
Thank you for the invite. It's been great. Thank you.
If you like what you heard, please follow us on Apple, Spotify, your favorite podcast platform, so you can catch up with all our great interviews, including Organized for Growth, our interview with Satish Mahatra, CEO of The Container Store. New episodes of Season 6 presented for another season by our friends at Marketile will show up each and every Tuesday. And be sure and tell all your friends and colleagues in the retail industry all about us.
And I'm Steve Dennis, author of the best-selling book, Remarkable Retail, How to Win and Keep Customers in the Age of Disruption. You can learn more about me, my consulting, and keynote speaking at stephenpdennis.com.
And I'm Michael LeBlanc, consumer retail growth consultant, keynote speaker and producer, and host of a series of retail trade podcasts, including this one. You can learn even more about me on LinkedIn, and you can catch up with Steve and I in person at Shop Talk in Vegas, March 26th, and a month later in Barcelona at the World Retail Congress, April 25th. Until then, safe travels, everyone.